Shit, Tupac's greatest hits. Speaking of changes, I wanna change this game like I'm losing in Madden, 30-6. Like that, y'all. Some people they fiend for things they've already seen. I think they wanted me to be like that, y'all. But it wasn't my scene. I started doing these things that made them say they can't do it like that, y'all. Hell no, they can't do it like that, y'all.
What is up, Log City, and welcome back to Spokast. Today on the podcast is Chey Scott. She is the arts and culture editor for The Inlander, and on this episode, we're going to discuss her passion for storytelling and journalism, starting with her early days of growing up in our region to starting her high school newspaper at Lakeside, graduating from WSU with a BA in communications, to being the arts and culture editor at The Inlander. And I am very excited for you all to listen to our conversation. Maybe you can see the smile on my face because we're going to dive into the history of The Inlander and its best of awards, because today in The Inlander, in the best of, Spokast will be named Best Local Podcast as voted by the Inlander readers. And words that come to mind are excited, honored, humbled, but all I can really say is thank you to all of the people who voted for Spokast. It means so much to me and what I'm doing here. I do this, all by myself pretty much here at Spokast, and it just really, like, the time and effort and passion that I put into this really shows because people are voting for Spokast, and that's really cool. And I also have to give a shout out to my fellow finalists. Second place was Grind 365, hosted by Downlow. And then third place, it goes to my friends, Aaron and Melissa at Trinity Northwest Magazine. And also I got to give a shout out to my friends in other categories, Exact Change and Isle Matisse. They were named Best Local Hip Hop Artists. And then the Boulevard Race was named second in Best Running Event. Again, thank you all so much for voting. Thank you to the Inlander, and thank you to Chey for representing the Inlander to be interviewed. I was like, I have to interview someone from the Inlander the day this news is announced. And it's all, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, like, it's been a dream to interview someone from the Inlander, and Chey was a great guest and just has so much knowledge about the history of Spokane, history of the Inlander, and all things in between. And we even go into some of the winners of this year's awards and talk about those a little bit. But yeah, this was a really fun show, and I just can't say it enough how humbled I am and how excited I am to just be able to celebrate this with you all. And I would not be here without my listeners. I truly appreciate you. I cannot wait to get into this episode. But before we do that, I got to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters, the Spokastanites. They are Nathan O'Brien, Enrique de la Novelle, Joe Williamson, Joe Van Voorhis, Elizabeth Geyer, Abby Pointer, Gina Campbell, Tyler Poole, Judy Pointer, Amber Sparks, Luke Baumgarten, Valerie Ozier, Nick Spanger, and Elizabeth and Bill Pointer. Thank you all again so much for being a part of the Patreon. If you want to support what I'm doing and become a Spokastanite, go to patreon.com/Spokast. Well, I will not keep you any longer. Here is Chey Scott, journalist and editor of the Arts and Culture section at the Inlander. Thank you all again so much. This is Spokast. I'm sitting here with Chey Scott of the Inlander, the arts and culture editor. Thank you so much for being on Spokast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. This is my first time on a podcast, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited this is your first podcast. It's been kind of a dream of mine on Spokast to have someone from the Inlander on the podcast. I wasn't born and raised here, but I've been around in Spokane since the 1990, and I don't know, I feel like the Inlander has always just kind of been a part of my life since I was like an adolescent and able to pick it up at probably Hastings. So, yeah. But Born and raised here in Spokane?
I was born at Deaconess Hospital.
Perfect. That was going to be my next question. Where were you born?
Yeah. It's kind of weird because my office looks out and I can like see the hospital. And so I always am like weird that my path took me from there and now I'm here. And
yeah, that's awesome. No, it's my youngest brother was born at Deaconess, and then my twins were born at Sacred Heart. But yeah, it's always like a badge of honor to be born at a Spokane hospital. Like, share a bit about your background and your upbringing in Spokane. You went to Lakeside High School, so were you growing up on the north side? Like,
I actually grew up in like rural Stevens County.
Okay.
So about it's like 45 minutes away.
Okay.
So I didn't grow up in the city, but you know, we came to Spokane every week to get groceries, go to doctor's appointments. And so, I mean, yeah, I was local and everything, you know, we watched the news from Spokane, read the news in Spokane.
Yeah.
So yeah, Lakeside out in 9 Mile, it's the school I went to, the district, for my whole life. It's a pretty small school, but you know, I gotta give them a shout out.
Definitely.
As a local girl who, you know, went out there. I started our school's newspaper actually.
Oh, you did?
When I was in high school.
You didn't have one?
No.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if they do anymore. I don't think they do.
Oh, that's too bad.
But it was like a leadership class project that I did, and it was called The Eagle's Eye because our mascot is the eagle.
I love it. So, like, were you like making newspapers before you were like ever even like doing news stories before you even were in high school or stuff like that? Like,
yeah, so it's kind of funny, but newspapers are actually like in my family. My grandpa on my dad's side worked at newspapers. He, I believe he was more of like a typesetter and a press operator. And then when my parents were young and I was a baby, they had like a small newspaper in Stevens County called the South Stevens Messenger. It was just a little community newspaper that they published, and they owned a print shop when I was little. So I kind of grew up around printing and writing, and so
that's so cool.
Yeah.
And does that still exist, or is that something that they kind of stopped doing?
But yeah, I mean, I don't feel like that really influenced me because I was so young.
Right.
But I always loved reading, and you know, when you're someone who loves reading and you're like, well, I could write books, but as a journalist, you get to write stories every day, which is a little more reliable than being a book author, I suppose.
Right, yeah.
You got to break out and be successful, which I don't know that I have any grand ideas about the next best-selling fiction book. So,
but is that like your passion is to write fiction?
No. I've written a little bit of fiction, but no, so when I was in like 8th grade was when I decided I want to be a journalist. So I was actually just thinking about this the other day randomly, but I did a job shadow when I was in 8th grade at the Spokesman Review. And then in high school, the Spokesman Review used to have a teen written section called Our Generation.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
You do?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It came out every Monday, and I was involved in that until I think it didn't last much longer after I started because it got cut from the budget. But I wrote for that for 2 years, which I only did like 4 stories. And then, yeah, I went to WSU and studied journalism. I wrote for the paper down there. And
is it Daily Evergreen? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
So like you just like set on a path of journalism, like
I did.
Starting at the newspaper at your high school, and that's so. What draws you to doing journalism? Is it the stories? What?
You know, I think it's just an innate sense of curiosity because when you're a journalist, if you see something and you wonder, like, I wonder why that is, or I wonder who is behind this, you can just be like, all right, I'm going to interview them and ask them all these questions. So it kind of satisfies your own personal curiosity. But then, you know, if I'm wondering about it, I'm sure other people are too. And so then you can tell that story to the community. So yeah, I mean, I've written everything as a journalist, and it's always interesting. And I like just picking people's brains and getting to know like what they're good at, what their stories are, getting people to explain things that are kind of complicated.
Right. Yeah. Well, like early on, like what was like a story that like really sticks out to you that you covered?
That's really hard because I've written hundreds of stories. And when people ask me like, oh, what are you working on? Or what did you work on last week? I'm like, hold on, I need to think about that because I'm already on the next story, right? So as far as early stories, I mean, I remember when I actually wrote for our generation, one of my stories that I was like super passionate about was like the danger of tanning beds, because back in like the early 2000s, everyone was like going to tanning beds. And so I remember writing a story about that, and I was so proud of it.
In like WSU, like what was the experience like there? Like I never went to college. Like, that's not true. I went to the Falls. I graduated from there with the graphic design degree, but I never got the real college experience. Like, what was the WSU experience like for you?
I mean, it was very traditional WSU experience. I chose WSU because they do have great journalism and communications. And I chose it also because it's fairly close to home, close to family, so I was able to come back and forth pretty regularly. But I was in a sorority down at WSU, so that was an experience for sure. And I wrote for the newspaper, and so those are kind of the two core things that I did outside of school. But
so I was looking. You graduated 2010, right? So you were there in 2008.
Yes.
And that was the last time WSU was in the tournament.
It was.
What was that like?
It was everything. Like oh my gosh, we would line up outside of Beasley to get into the games early. They had like a student section, and I'm totally blanking on what the name of it is.
I'm not sure what it's called either.
I was like a member of it, and I had a T-shirt and everything. And I had like
their version of the Kennel Club.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like my sorority sisters and I, we would like make signs. I had a jersey for, oh my gosh, what is his name?
Klay Thompson?
No.
Oh.
But Klay Thompson was there.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of who else would have been there at the same time.
Derek Lowe?
Derek Lowe, yeah.
Yeah, I had his jersey. He was like my favorite player. And my mom got really into watching it. Like she would watch the games at home, and she came down to a game with me, and it was just so fun to go to the games and see them go so far. I have a Sweet 16 shirt still somewhere from that. So
that's so cool.
It was very fun and exciting to see that.
Are you excited for this year?
You know, I haven't really been following the team, but I'm very excited that they're back because I always kind of have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder that Gonzaga gets all the love.
All the love.
And nobody ever cares as much about Eastern, which all my family went to Eastern and WSU because, you know, they're bigger schools and they have bigger teams, bigger schools that they compete against. Not that that's, you know, the signifier of a team's skill, but we'll see what happens.
No, totally. It's definitely like Gonzaga. I think the success has made them kind of become like our professional team, and I think that's why we focus on it. I'm excited for the next 2 years that WSU and Gonzaga will be playing each other twice a season. So that will, because like that rivalry has kind of ended. They haven't really played that game often. Now they have to do it since they're going to be playing, since WSU will be playing in the WCC. So that'll be exciting. Yeah.
There was one game that they played as like a non-conference game when I was there, and we beat Gonzaga.
You beat I remember that game. One thing I wanted to go back to about your early memories of Spokane is something I like to talk to people about, like who've been here their whole life, is like, what were some of your early memories from like coming into Spokane?
For, you know, when we were kids, definitely it would be like a whole day of errands, especially like in the summer. So, you know, we'd leave the house at like 9 and come in and, you know, doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, like other things. And so just lots of driving, like you kind of just
lots of driving.
Gotta sit in the car. And we didn't have iPads back then, so we were reading books and stuff.
Totally. So it was like a trip to come into Spokane.
It was, And you know, you were like just coming up with like I Spy bingo games in the car with your siblings.
I love that drive. I mean, I will go do the drive up through to Stevens County because it's so beautiful up there, and you can kind of like get lost, and then you can kind of loop back around and come back down, and it is a really nice drive, especially going out through 9 Mile.
You follow Long Lake for like most of it, the river.
Yeah. So. Well, before we get into everything about the Inlander. We're going to play a quick game called the Spokast Hot List.
Okay.
It's just a list of questions, and not questions, words. And I'm going to say the word, and you're going to say the first word that comes to your mind as it relates to Spokane. And the first question I always ask is park.
Manitou.
Coffee.
Indaba.
Brewery.
No lie.
Artist.
There's so many.
There's so many.
Harold Blaze.
I love it. Burger.
Durkins.
Shopping.
I'm just gonna say vintage because that's my other passion.
We have tons of great places around here and in Spokane.
Yes.
Breakfast or brunch, like we're at.
You know, I really like the brunch at 1898 Public House.
I've never been. I've only been there for like lunch, for happy hour. But I've heard great things about the brunch. Neighborhood.
Garland, which is part of North Hill, and I live in North Hill.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Pizza.
Flying Goat.
Event.
I mean, I want to say Bloomsday.
Yeah. I mean, there's the big three. It's like Bloomsday, it's Hoop Fest, and what did I call the other big three? There was another one. Pig on the Park. That's kind of a big one.
But there's so many other small ones.
Yeah, there's so many small ones. Yeah. Music venue.
I mean, I don't want to say the Knitting Factory because that's basic, so I'll say the Bartlett / Lucky You, which Lucky You is now the Chameleon. So.
I should say, like, you can go historic on the music venue because, like, it is one of those things that, like, it is an issue with Spokane. There's not a ton of independent music venues. And then the last question I ask is always catered towards the guest is, what is the best alt weekly?
Well, it is the Inlander because we are the only alt weekly.
Exactly. Well, before the Inlander, after college, did you work at the Spokane Business Journal?
I did, yeah. I did 2 years there before I came to the Inlander.
Yeah, so. And before we get into your early days at the Inlander, what was your connection with the Inlander before working there? I specifically have a memory of me and my wife when she was studying for the CPA exam back in like 2005. We would go down to not First Ave Coffee, but like the Rocket Bakery on First Avenue. And she would study and I would sit and read the Inlander. And I feel like that time, like I feel like the Inlander's always awesome to pick up, but like during that time was like 2005, 2006. I was like reading a bunch of stuff probably from Luke Baumgarten and like, and it just like is very nostalgic for me to go sit in Rocket Bakery. Like, do you have anything like that? Like,
not really. I mean, I think I knew all the writers who worked there before I did, Luke, Leah Satilli, who was a great mentor to me and went on to write amazing book. Heidi Groover, Daniel Walters worked there at that time.
Definitely.
So I think I just knew of them and I just thought, wow, they're so cool because they write such like interesting stories, important stories. And I remember when I applied for that job, calling it like my dream job would be to work at the Inlander when I was only like 23, 24. And I mean, it's still true.
Yeah.
So yeah, those would really just be my memories, is reading it and just admiring the work that they did.
Totally.
And still do.
Love that. Like, so when you applied, what was your first position at the Inlander?
I was the calendar editor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like,
and we call that listings editor because it also includes kind of like managing our restaurant database. And so, yeah, that was my job. It's kind of like one of the sort of entry-level jobs as a writer there. But I did it for a long time because I really liked it. And of course, I wrote a lot of stories as well.
I remember seeing your byline, like Chey Scott, and like because you covered music and events going on, like mostly. Like, is that what like you'd write the little blurbs?
Yeah, so like every week before the calendar, like the really dense calendar listings, we have our 5 like highlights of the week.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
Like the email I get every week. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I wrote those, and like I'm trying to think of some really early stories I wrote. I remember one was like, "Is trick or treating dying?" Like,
That's awesome. Yeah.
and yeah, just lots of stories for all of our special issues that we do every year.
So, and you were in the old, like, so was that still when the Inlanders in the old Masonic, like, they were next to the Masonic Temple?
That was before I started, but yeah,
okay.
they were there, and then we were in the Hutton building, so above Sweet Frostings.
Yes, okay.
So I was hired when the Inlander was still there, and we moved to Kendall Yards a year later in 2013.
Okay.
So I was in that building for a year.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that I feel that Kendall Yards location's been there for. It feels like it's only been a couple of years, but it's now been 10 years.
Yeah, our 10 years there was last summer.
That's amazing. How has your role evolved? Like, so you went from doing what you did, and now you're the arts and culture editor.
Yeah.
Like, have you? What did you do in between that? Did you do anything?
Yeah,
else?
lots of things. I mean, I was the food editor for a while. I still sort of oversee food, but I have like writers who have written kind of the whole food section. And I also edit our annual manual magazine.
Yeah, you're the editor on that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so that comes out every September, and that's kind of our guide to the Inland Northwest. So for locals, but also like visitors, people who are recently moved here. It's a collection of a lot of our stories that we do in the weekly that people maybe missed, or, it's like a guide to like, I'm trying to think, because every year we kind of do a different mix of stories, but we have like shopping guides, dining guides, recreation. Like last year's issue has a story on like pickleball becoming super popular, and guides to like vintage shopping, or all the bookstores in town, record shops.
Just kind of giving like someone, if they wanted to like kind of learn topical what's going on in Spokane, you could pick up the annual manual. Kind of I think you did a music thing in their last one. I don't know if it was Seth who wrote it, but someone gave a list of like the best albums or best that came out like in the last year, and he's in it, and it made his day, like week, like and so it was cool to see it with my friend Jinx Universe. But like, what are some like misconceptions about like being a writer or working? Like, I feel like everyone thinks like all you do is write. Like, what is your like everyday like tasks that you're doing? Like, is it just a ton of emails, communicating? Like, what's the misconceptions about being an editor?
Yeah, I mean, I manage a team of writers, and I work with freelancers and interns. So it's a lot of just planning content, like scheduling things, making sure that we are getting a nice balance of the types of stories we're covering, because, there's theater, there's arts, there's music, which Seth Summerfield, he oversees the music section. And, just making sure we're covering things in a timely manner and not playing favorites.
Yeah.
As much as people think that we have favorites, we don't.
That's so true. I feel like it's so hard to like probably balance that, like to not always want to, because like there's so much stuff that's always like going on at the Chameleon, or like new things, and or like the Garland opening, like reopening, and there's just like there's so much that's always going on. It kind of seemed like that's getting a lot of coverage, but it's really like it's very important to the community too. What are some stories like over your years like that have been your favorite that you've covered?
There's been a lot. I mean, some of my favorite stories in the more recent years, like I did a really cool piece on the 40th anniversary of Mount St. Helens, and I interviewed people sort of like an oral history, like what do you remember of that day?
Yeah.
And that was cool. I remember I interviewed John Waite at Merlin's, and he remembered it and had like a cool story. And I interviewed a guy who had been working for the city at the time, and he had all these really amazing photos that had never been published, and he let us publish those with the story.
That's cool.
I wrote another pretty cool historical piece about Hanford. and the 75th anniversary of the Hanford nuclear
Yeah.
plant opening. And you can go down there and go on tours. Like, it's just open to the public. You can walk inside and see the reactor where
Wow.
they made all of that plutonium.
Right.
So I recommend people do that. It's crazy that it's just essentially a museum now.
Yeah. What draws you to like the history? Because like that's something about Spokane that like I'm somewhat obsessed with. Like I love like talking to people about their experience, like about I love if someone experienced the Mount St. Helens eruption, I love talking to them about that. I'm also fascinated with people who lived here in Spokane when the World's Fair happened because it was such a big deal. What draws you to it?
I think just knowing the history of Spokane, when you've lived here long enough, you just kind of pick up little bits and about things like that. But getting to dig into it and talk to people who lived through that history when they maybe didn't realize it was history. It's like you and I talking right now, like we're, in this moment, but 40 years from now, and we look back on like what's happening in Spokane.
Yeah.
Or like, this podcast, it's like you don't realize you're in history when it's happening.
That's
and
so true.
So I think that's fascinating. And just getting to learn about that. I think we all love nostalgia, right? So getting to talk to people about their lived experience during a moment in history.
Yeah.
And just how the region has played these like really important roles in everybody's lives.
Totally.
I think we all have an inferiority complex to a degree in Spokane, right?
Yeah, no, totally.
But like there's a lot of cool stuff and cool people who came out of Spokane who still live here, who like changed the region for the better. I mean, and the expo stuff, that's super fascinating. And obviously with the 50th anniversary, we have a big issue dedicated to that coming out. And my mom actually lived here during expo and went and
That's awesome.
has memories and photos of that time. And I have some fun like vintage expo memorabilia of my own that I found.
do too. I have like Boo Radley's has like a little space that had and I think and the old White Elephant had a ton of stuff.
They did, yeah.
And I have a guide. I think I have a guide, and I have a couple ashtrays.
Yeah, ashtrays are very common and easy to find.
Yeah, they're very. What's like your coolest piece that you have from it?
I actually have a vintage shirt.
Oh,
those
cool.
seem like really hard to find. It's actually like a kid's shirt, but it's kind of like, it still fits me. I guess.
That's awesome.
It just has a logo on it, and I found it at Collective Threads up in Garland, and I was like, oh my gosh,
You gotta have that.
Super cool.
Well, if you're looking around for shirts, can you please try to find me a 1984 Bloomsday shirt?
Oh man.
If you ever see one, I can find like 85, 86, sometimes 83, but I've never seen an 84 shirt.
Do you know what color it is?
I believe it's black.
I've seen the black one.
I'm trying to think of like I don't actually go looking for it. I've gone to like Global Thrift. They have all the ones on the wall,
yeah.
and I've never like gone. I don't go back and I drive by it every day. I should just stop by like once a week just to look. But I should. It's one of those pieces of memorabilia like I really want from Spokane.
Did you do Bloomsday in 1984?
No, I was born in 1984.
Okay, that was gonna be my next question.
In 2020 and 2021, I was a Bloomsday ambassador, and I just love Bloomsday. It's the history of it. It's really interesting to me. I love running. I was a cross country runner in high school, and it's something that just really fascinates me. I was gonna ask, like, in your time of like covering stuff about the history of Spokane, like what is something that like really interests you that like maybe not a lot of people know about?
Well, one of my favorite stories that I bring up a lot when people ask me about my work over the years is kind of an obscure thing that I wrote about, which is so Spokane has a historic registry of places. They also have a I don't know if it's called I think it is. I think it's the historic tree registry. There's actually trees on the registry.
Oh, wow.
There's also barns, like historic barns. But the tree one, there's only like, I don't know, maybe less than 2 dozen.
Oh.
And I did a story. So the Inlander used to have a feature called The Last Word, which is basically just the last page of the Inlander.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had it for a while for a number of reasons, but maybe it'll come back someday. So it's kind of just a catch-all. Like writers would write sort of about anything they wanted, like essays, kind of format busting, like listicle type stories.
Yeah.
So I decided I was going to go visit a bunch of the trees on the registry and sort of write about why they're on the registry, but also kind of do a little bit of creative nonfiction work. So one of the trees, it's up on Peone Prairie. So like if you go out like Bigelow Gulch and you go up towards Green Bluff area.
I grew up there.
Yeah. There's like a big pine tree, and it's called I think it's called the treaty tree. I wrote this story back in like 2016, so that's why my memory is a little fuzzy. And supposedly it was where during one of the conflicts between the indigenous people of the region and the white, colonizers, they surrendered there at this tree. And it's just this giant tree on a hill kind of by itself. And allegedly they flew like a white flag from the top of this tree.
Huh.
I am a journalist, and
Right,
the facts
yeah.
do matter, but I'm just recalling this from memory.
Yeah.
And then the other trees, like a lot of them are just huge, huge old trees. Like there's one in Grant Park and South Perry. There's a really old, huge pine tree in Brown's Edition. And yeah, just the fact that there's a tree registry, I think is really cool.
That is cool.
I don't know.
I do a podcast with the Conservation District. I should talk to him about. I should ask them about it because I'm sure they know about it. That's really cool. That is fascinating. I'd love to visit them just to kind of learn about it. That's really, really cool. So like speaking of history, like the Inlander was started in 1993. I don't really know the history of it. I probably should have done a little bit of more research. I've definitely read stories about it, and I apparently don't retain that history. But like, why was it started, and by who?
Yeah, so it was started in 1993. You're correct. We just celebrated the 30th anniversary last fall. So the first issue was in October of 93. And it was started by 2 brothers, Ted and Jer McGregor. And Ted is still our publisher to this day, and Jer is our operations manager. And so yeah, family business. If I had to guess, we have around 30 employees, so it's a pretty small operation. Everybody's based there in our Kendall Yards office. Yeah, and so it was actually Ted's graduate school project. Like his final was to he created a business plan for the Inlander.
Oh wow!
And then came home, and him and Jared teamed up and made it happen.
That's
and
so cool.
So back in the day, they were based in a house, and they just got some of their friends to write, and they were delivering the Inlanders themselves out of the backs of their cars. And so there's a lot of history that explains it. And if anyone wants to dive deep into our archives, last October we would have had the 30th anniversary issue, kind of looking back. And at the time, I'm not really sure how many alt weeklies there were in the US, but bigger cities had them, and they were just, as the name suggests, alternative weekly publication to the daily newspapers like the Seattle Times, the Spokesman Review, what have you. So yeah, and it's been around ever since.
That's so cool. And there has never been a mini alt weeklies since the Inlander, and there was I can't imagine there was one before the Inlander.
I don't think so. I think alt weeklies came out of kind of maybe more of the I don't actually know the history of alt weeklies, but
I'm curious. I know about the Stranger. I don't know if I feel like the Stranger might be an early alt weekly, but I want to ask do you know why the Inlander has always been free? I feel like it's one of those things that we take for granted. We can all go grab an Inlander and grab one downstairs here at the community building, grab one across the street at Main Market, anywhere. Do you know why it's always been free?
I think that's just the model of the alt weeklies, and a free paper means more people can read it. With any subscription, it's a barrier for people. But yeah, I mean, the reason we're free is because of advertisers, right?
Yeah.
And even though traditional print media is struggling, like we're doing well, and being a community newspaper, you know, people pick up the Inlander to read about new restaurants, but then there's also, and I can't really speak to the advertising side as much because I'm completely like removed from that for ethical reasons. But, you know, and that's where those advertisers want to be, is next to these stories that are telling people about what's happening, like what's the new business, what's, you know, city council doing to deal with like the opioid crisis, what, you know, even the I Saw Yous, which when, as journalists, when we are out in the community and we're like, oh, people ask us where we work, and you're like, oh, I work at the Inlander. And the first thing they'll say, usually, it's like the joke in the office is, oh, I love the I Saw Yous. And you just sit there and you're like, but do you actually read our journalism? Because it's really good.
Right. That is one of the sections I always scan through. I mean, this because it is there. I mean, it seems like it's gotten a lot negative over the years, and with the cheers and jeers. Like I love the cheers, and then I love the jeers that people are responding to people that are cheering, or vice versa. It's there's
definitely like back and forth.
There's definitely back and forth. But I agree. Like you should definitely be reading the other pieces of it, because the articles are what make it enjoyable to read, in my opinion. How do you go about like deciding what you're going to write about? Like what's your process?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we, you know, try to make sure we're balanced in the types of coverage that we're including every week. But from week to week, you know, there could be way too many things going on that we can actually physically cover due to space and our own resources. So yeah, I would say I try to make a nice balance between like event previews and then just like newsy things, like profiles of people doing cool stuff, and things that people reach out to us and they pitch us and they're like, hey, I'm doing this thing, you guys might want to write about it. Because we do get a lot of those emails, and you know, we also are members of this community and we notice and hear about things ourselves, and we're always seeking stories. So whether we're noticing like an interesting trend, or you know, we drove by a place and we're like, oh, hey, that looks like a new restaurant, and I didn't know about it. So yeah, I mostly am curious too, like how do you decide what you get to write about? Like do you find like I'm gonna me personally, like what I hold up for myself.
Like because you get to like, because you take time on probably some of your bigger pieces, like those take a couple of months or weeks. I mean, is everything you do like kind of like do you not sit on stuff? I don't know. I guess is what I'm asking.
It depends. Like if it's something I'm like, oh, I really want to write that story. Like you kind of hoard things that you're like, I'm not letting anyone write this because this is mine. But you also can't do that because as an editor, you have to trust your writers to do it. But yeah, I mean, for myself, it's just sort of like if we're working on a bunch of big projects like Best Of, I don't have a lot of time to write. So I kind of have to make sure I'm planning my like passion stories around my other responsibilities as an editor. But yeah, I mean, you can also make the time for it if you really want to.
Totally.
So
so I want to get into like, this whole month for the Inlander is it seems like a kind of a crazy month.
It is.
Like
yes.
you had Restaurant Week at the beginning of it. Now you're working on Best Of, and like that has to seem like just a crazy amount of work to be doing all at the same time. I mean, I guess like the work for Restaurant Week is probably before, but like you're doing stuff during it as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, because during Restaurant Week is when the Best Of ballot and the voting is live. So it was a lot of like, okay, we have to like get the Restaurant Week guide and all the menus and then the Best Of. So it is quite busy. You're right. And then Best Of, you know, as soon as we get the results tallied, it's like, okay, we got to like write everything up, and it takes a very large team of writers to get all of that content into the issue, which, you know, is one of our biggest issues of the year. I think the other biggest is probably the summer guide. So those are probably tied, but they're huge. They're like, oh my gosh, a normal Inlander right now is probably in the 48 pages, and then a best of or a summer guide is like, Jer would know this, and I can't get it wrong on his behalf. But it's like magnitudes bigger.
Yeah, the summer guide's huge.
Like 6 regular inlanders stapled together.
I love getting the summer guide, like especially having children, like going through it and being like, oh, like our kids could go do this. I think we put our kids into a theater camp 2 years ago, probably because we've read it in the Inlander. Like this is happening at SYT, and so we put Lincoln Ivy in there, and it's a great guide to go through, like see what's happening around the city, especially like shows. Like it's to keep at your house. This is like kind of the see, because like the internet is right there, but like having something like tangible to like just like flip through and like find it is for me seems so much easier.
So you actually do keep it?
I do, like around my house. I keep too many Inlanders. I have like I've won the best of in local podcast twice, and I have like probably 10 of them in my basement. And I'm like, I brought one out the other day to kind of look at it and like get an idea for the ad size. And I was like, and Abby's like, can I throw this away? And I'm like, no, I want to keep that. And she's like, you have 5 others. I'm like, I guess
you have to keep them because the archives, like we keep a set number of copies and that's it.
Oh, wow.
So, you got to hold on to them if you want to keep the physical ones.
Totally. But I do keep the guides around the house.
It's good. So you're one of our like star readers.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I will pick up an Inlander every week and put it in my car next to me. I will sometimes try to read it, read pieces of it, and then sometimes I don't. Like it's like anything. Like I would love to dedicate a ton of time to being able to read through an entire Inlander every week, but it's not always doable. But I love that it's there because it's very nostalgic for me, and it's something that I can just kind of grab and find out what's going on. One of the things I remember looking at using the Inlander for most was movie times, because movie times would always be published it'd always come out on a Thursday, and pre-internet or like early internet when you're a teenager in like 2002, like I'm like going through the times, like trying to find out what time this movie's playing. So it was always useful for that. But like, yeah, I keep Inlanders around a lot, probably too much. So speaking of the best of, it also started, well, I guess it's like probably less than a year later in 1994. And why was the best of started? Is there any history there?
I think it's just another hallmark of alt weeklies, is just doing the best of the community and doing it as a reader's poll. Contrary to what some people might believe, we do not pick the winners. It's all readers.
Right? That's awesome. So
we always make sure people know, because some people will be like, oh, the Inlander voted us best blank. And it's like, no, the readers of the Inlander voted you best. Yeah, again, I think it's just a hallmark of alt weeklies. Like other alt weeklies around the U.S. still do them to this day. Like I know I've picked up The Stranger or the Willamette Week best of just to see like, oh, how did they do it a little differently than us? What are their categories? Because it can always be kind of inspiring to see what other questions other papers are asking.
Yeah, I loved it. I used to submit my Inlander. I'd mail it in, or I take it or drop it off.
No, it was all like a write-in.
When it was write-in, yeah. And I mean, I kind of wish you still did that. Obviously, it's not very practical, but like,
yeah, that was a lot of work to have to tally all those votes,
right? But I mean, this is where I'm gonna probably love on the Inlander a lot. Is just I used to go through the Inlander on the best of. That was like an issue every year that came out, and I would just like go through it, and I would just be mesmerized by who was in it, like, and it really meant, and it still does to me, mean something to like win like best of burger or best of, and like you really take it to heart. And it is an honor to be a part of it and to have been voted by the readers as best of podcast, because it's just I feel like it just shows like what I'm doing is important and that people are noticing it. What are some of like the Hall of Fame categories? Like I know like Dave, Ken, and Molly have like I think they've always won, right? And they're in the Hall of Fame. Do they still get voted for, right?
Yeah. Are you still recording?
Yes, I'm still recording. Yeah.
So for Hall of Fame, the rules are that they just have to have 10 wins, and it doesn't have to be consecutive, and they can continue winning.
Yeah.
So we don't have any like rules about that. Like Domini Sandwiches, this is their 30th win.
Wow.
So they have won every year since the Inlander was around and
Wow.
doing best of.
Yeah.
So I think they're the first ones to hit that 30
Yeah.
year mark.
Does that mean they've won? And there's always been a sandwich category.
Yeah, and they've won every year.
Wow, that's crazy.
Which is wild.
like Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
Like,
so they're the most Hall of Fame. But this year we introduced Best Burgers. It was Wisconsin Burger, so they joined the Hall of Fame.
oh, nice.
And Sweet Frostings joined for Best Cupcakes.
Yes.
I think we have a few others.
Who are some like first time winners?
Some first-time winners. So Best Cheap Eats, which has long been held by Dick's, is now Frugal's
Oh, wow.
over by Gonzaga,
Yeah.
which they're really good.
Are they, I said this yesterday on the podcast. I'm friends with the Delish family, and I've never went because I felt like I was dishonoring them by going to Frugal's. But I need to go try it.
Yeah.
What about what is there any upsets? That was an upset.
I guess it was an upset because I mean I think Dick's was in the Hall of Fame. I'd have to double check that, but I know for a fact that Dick's won Best Cheap Eats. Best Middle Eastern Food was another upset. I feel like the last several years it's been Baba from Adam Hegstead.
Yeah.
And this year a brand new place, Emrin Restaurant and Market, which is on Division.
Yeah, I've driven by it.
We just had a story about it opening just a few months ago, so I'm like very like surprised that they won that quickly.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So,
What was there any first time categories this year?
yeah, so some of the new ones this year was Best Arts and Cultural Event. Any guesses on who that was? Who won?
I'm not sure. What?
It's Terrain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
So,
awesome.
I mean, Terrain, I think
They've won like,
they've won before,
Yeah.
but this is a new category.
yeah.
And then we also had Best Local Book of the past year, and that is Travis Baldry, who wrote like a cozy fantasy novel called Bookshops and Bone Dust. We had a profile of him a couple months ago.
I should check that out. That's exciting. That's cool that there's like there's categories that you're adding that like there's enough events or things happening to have that category.
Yeah.
Any other like notables?
Yeah, so Best Local Seltzer, I think this is a new one, but it was won by No Lie Brew House.
Oh, nice.
So they have their seltzer line, and we'd never asked about seltzer. We've always asked about brewery and cider and wine and coffee, but seltzer was new this year.
Yeah.
So, and then another new one, which I'm not sure why this has never been asked before, but the Best Comedy Venue, Spokane Comedy Club.
Yeah.
I guess now that we have several, because for some categories, if there's not really enough critical mass of like, we can have a for sure like
Yeah.
amount of places to qualify.
Totally. Because like the qualifications for that would have been the comedy club, maybe, then like definitely the Knitting Factory and
Like-
Fox.
Yeah, I feel like Spokane Arena and
Spokane
the new
Arena, yeah.
Spokane Live out at the Spokane Tribe Casino, and Northern Quest has
Oh,
comedians.
Northern Quest, and yeah.
So there's like a lot of places that host them
that-
pretty regularly.
I saw that there was a best indoor music event. Was that, or has that always been there? Or is that, I feel like you changed the category from indoor to outdoor.
We had
separated it.
both. So
Oh,
we
okay.
had best indoor concert and best outdoor. So I do have the results of that. So the best indoor concert was the Foo Fighters at Spokane Arena in August of last year. And the best outdoor concert, give me a sec. Was Modest Mouse, Pixies, and Cat Power at the Pavilion in September.
Should have gone to that.
So
Having this many categories, like it seems like an undertaking to do. Like, how do you select like going about like who gets featured or who gets like a write up?
So yeah, that is also sort of decided by just kind of all of us coming together. And if they got written up last year with a longer story, then no. All of the Hall of Fame winners, when they win and are inducted into the Hall of Fame, get a longer write up.
Yeah.
And then some of them, if it's like, oh wow, this is like kind of a new interesting winner that we haven't really covered recently. Like a good example of that is the story that I wrote this year about our best escape room.
Oh, okay.
So I wrote about Think Tank.
Think Tank, yeah.
We hadn't really covered them before. They opened right before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but I happened to go and like do the escape room there.
Yeah.
And it's super cool there. And I was like, this is a story.
Yeah.
And so yeah, just trying to pick things that we think will be interesting to readers to learn about that we maybe haven't covered recently or ever. Just because, yeah.
It's a treat to be able to get featured. When we won the Best Local Podcast the first time, we were Daniel Walters wrote a nice feature on us. And I embarrassingly, when we were getting interviewed by him, said, I've met your brother. And he's like, who's my brother? And I said, isn't it Jess? And isn't Jess and I think actually, and he's like, no, that's I forget which one has an S on their last name, but I was very embarrassed, and it was a great way to start off the interview.
That's funny, and he would get that a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. I think he mentioned that too. Mm-hmm. Can I look at it real quick?
Sure.
I'd love to see.
It's double-sided, so it's a little bit messy there because.
Best trivia night is Garland Brew Works Bearded Trivia. I've heard great things about that. Ooh, best new restaurant. I have not been to Sorella, and it's right in Kendall Yards. Mm-hmm. I need to go there. I've heard nothing but amazing things. Oh, this was a fun question. The best new community effort like Expo 74 that's put us on the map is the Podium. Mm-hmm. And the Spokane Stadium one, if you have that next year, should definitely... I guess that was on there.
I think it won second place, or third place.
Third place, but like
I feel like all three of those really kind of together in one group is like they're all in the same area. They're all like kind of revitalizing downtown and bringing people downtown. So
I went to the first soccer match for the Spokane Velocity, and that whole area now is just buzzing. Mm-hmm. It's such a cool space in Spokane. But this is one that's kind of sad, is best now closed local business you miss most. And the White Elephant, that has to take the cake. I miss the White Elephant a lot. And Lucky You Lounge and Hastings. Hastings is definitely like, I would go to Hastings and walk around Hastings for hours. I'd read books, I'd look at CDs, video games. And it was like that place where, like, if I had like an extra hour and I didn't need to really be anywhere, I would just go walk around in a Hastings.
I know all of us old millennials have memories of Hastings.
Well, this is awesome. This is exciting. I would advise everyone to go check it out. Go to these places, these new places. Go support local. It is really like that's what this is all about. Is highlighting, is supporting the amazing things that are happening locally in Spokane, and this is cool. Best singer, Blake Braley. I need to get him on here. He plays across there all the time, but now he's touring with Ellen Stone full time. So
I know, I did hear that. Yeah, actually, well, I read it in our write up about him
That's
winning
awesome.
for best of. So
awesome. Well, I mean, I feel like there's so much else we could probably talk about, but I want to talk about the last thing is like how can people support the Inlander outside of reading it?
You know, we have some newsletters. We have like our weekend countdown newsletter, which is like the events coming up over the weekend. So you could sign up for that.
Yeah.
We have the entree food newsletter. We have an Inlander Insiders program that was sort of kind of like a Patreon for the Inlander, and that's still active. It's just not something we're actively like promoting. So that does exist, and people can donate a set amount every month to support our journalism, but it's again not a huge important thing that we're asking people to contribute to. So I would just say read the Inlander. You can email us feedback. You can email us story ideas. We want to hear from you.
Yeah. What's the easiest way to do that? Just like, is it to contact us?
editor@inlander.com would be our main email.
Yeah.
So you can reach all of our editorial leadership at that email and pitch stories. So
I should give you a second to allow you to like give shout outs to like how people can find you online. Like, what's the best way of connecting with you? Like,
to connect with me directly at the Inlander, my email is Chey S, CHEYS @inlander.com. I'm not super active on Twitter, which is like maybe kind of weird as a journalist because it seems like most journalists are prolific tweeters, but I'm not.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, you can read my stories.
Read your stories,
on
yeah.
inlander.com.
You can also go to, I will shout out, you have a website.
I do. It hasn't been updated in a while. So you can go to my website, cheyscott.com, and look at my writing portfolio. It's all Inlander work, so it's not that exciting, but
you can go and find your article about Mount St. Helens.
and Hanford, and some other pieces. So
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you, Chey, for coming on. I appreciate the Inlander for putting on the best of, and I thank the readers for voting Spokast.
Congratulations on your win.
Thank you. I will say, and this, I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before, but the first year we won it. Me and my former host of the podcast. It was 2020. Literally, we were all ready to go to the best of party on March 16th, and then that was like the week the world shut down.
It was incredibly, it's crazy to think that was 4 years ago.
It is crazy. That was 4 years ago.
Because it feels like it never happened to a degree. Like we've returned to normal.
Yeah, it's so true.
So it kind of is this dark period of history.
Yeah. And then the next year, we didn't hold one as well, because I think the next year was like you had the best of later in the year.
Yeah, it was in summer.
And it was that was like when we had the resurgence of.
Yeah, there was gathering restrictions, so we didn't have a party.
Yeah.
So you haven't been to a party. And last year did we ask the question last year? No,
you didn't ask. I didn't sneak in, but I got in. I got an invitation.
Okay.
I got third in best recording studio, and I went and celebrated with my friends who had won their awards, and I was able to go. But it's a fun event to be a part of, and it's an honor to be voted, because it is like a dream come true, and I'll be excited to party tonight and have everyone listen to this podcast. Before we leave, though, I always ask all my guests one last question, and that question is, why Spokane?
I mean, besides the fact that I just have really deep roots here, being born and raised here, I felt really lucky to be able to come back home and work in my field in Spokane and tell the stories that I care about as a member of the community. And the Inlander has always just been like, we're here to highlight and showcase Spokane and help make Spokane better, and the whole Inland Northwest, not just Spokane.
Yeah.
So.
Well, anyone who hasn't picked up an Inlander yet, I'm sure you have, but go pick it up and read it and enjoy it, because that's what it's made for.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Chey. I appreciate you coming on, and thank you to all listeners. Till next time, peace.
I wanna change this game like I'm losing in Madden 30-6. Like that, y'all. Some people, they fiend for things they've already seen. I think they wanted me to be like that, y'all. But it wasn't my scene. I started doing these things that made them say they can't do it like that, y'all. Hell no, they can't do it like that, y'all. Hell no, they can't do it like that, y'all. Hell no, they can't do it like that. Hold up. Without a day, hey, somebody better tell Ellen that I'm on the way. Somebody tell Charlamagne, hey, I'm on the way. There ain't a stage in this world that I couldn't play. Coachella with a full live band would make sense. DJ sets at Summer Jam makes